People who love geography carry a map in their heads. Say the name of a country, and they instantly know exactly where it sits. France is right there. It's not going anywhere. Almost every country on Earth has stayed exactly where it started. But every so often in history, an entire nation has been forced, or has chosen, to pack up and rebuild itself somewhere else entirely. Welcome to Explained Board. Today, we're tracking down the countries that didn't just redraw their borders, they changed addresses completely. Some were pushed out by stronger neighbors. Others left such a powerful legacy that their name ended up living 1,000 miles from their original home. The Bulgaria we know today sits on the Black Sea, one of the Balkan states. But the original Bulgaria wasn't anywhere close to here. Around 650 AD, a state known as Old Great Bulgaria existed far to the northeast, across southern Ukraine and Crimea. It wasn't as powerful as the Byzantine Empire or the Sassanid Persians next door, but it held real territory, stretching all the way to the shores of the Caspian Sea. Then came the Khazars. In the 7th century, this Turkic power based north of the Caspian went to war with the Bulgars, defeated them, and seized their territory in what is now southern Ukraine. The Bulgars scattered. Some fled west, others fled east. That split created two separate Bulgarian states. One settled near the Black Sea, eventually forming the first Bulgarian Empire in the Balkans, the direct ancestor of the country we know today. The other became Volga Bulgaria, founded along the Volga River in what is now Russia.
Volga Bulgaria actually outlasted its western cousin for a while, surviving roughly 600 years, until the 13th century, when the Mongols swept through and destroyed it too. Once again, the Bulgar name drifted west, eventually surviving only in the Balkan state that had already taken root there. And here's the part that defines Bulgarian history. Since settling permanently on the Black Sea coast, Bulgaria has been conquered again and again by Romans, by Ottomans, occasionally by Russians, but it has never physically moved since. The unofficial motto might as well be, "We die here. We don't leave." And they haven't. Here is a strange postscript, though. After the fall of the Ottoman Empire, Bulgaria laid claim to parts of Greek territory, a claim plenty of people found surprising, given that Greek communities had lived in that region for thousands of years, while the Bulgarians themselves had arrived from an entirely different part of the map. Let's head to West Africa, to Ghana. Despite being a relatively small country today, Ghana isn't some invented colonial border with a name picked out of a hat. It has real historical roots. The twist is that the name and the land it originally belonged to are no longer in the same place. The ancient Ghana Empire was a genuine land power, centered in what is now northern Mali, hundreds of kilometers north of the country that carries its name today. Modern Ghana sits on the Atlantic coast, roughly 600 kilometers south of where the original empire actually stood. Ancient Ghana's history stretches back to around 300 AD, but there's no written record of it until centuries later. One of the earliest known mentions comes from the 9th century, from none other than Muhammad ibn Musa al-Khwarizmi, the mathematician whose name eventually gave us the word algorithm. He wrote that a kingdom called Ghana existed, and that its people practiced Islam. Beyond that, almost nothing else about it was written down for a long time. Fast forward to 1874. The British moved into West Africa and absorbed the entire region, modern Ghana, Burkina Faso, and Mali, including the original territory of ancient Ghana, into their empire. When they carved up their colonial holdings, they didn't put ancient Ghana's name back on ancient Ghana's land. Instead, they attached the name to a completely different piece of territory on the coast, land chosen for its usefulness to the British, with no real historical connection to the empire it now carried the name of.
The people living in modern Ghana today have no direct lineage to the ancient Ghana Empire. Only the name made the journey. If you wanted to find the actual descendants of that empire, you'd need to look in modern Mali and Mauritania. Ha! To put that in perspective, imagine if Africa and Europe swapped roles in history, and an African colonial power took over Europe, then decided to rename Italy Sweden, purely because it liked the sound of it. Italians would carry a Swedish name they have nothing to do with, while the real Sweden ended up called something else entirely.
Now, to one of history's great trading empires, one that was born in one place and built its legacy somewhere else entirely. You know it as the Mughal Empire, though its own rulers called it the Gurkhani Empire. Its founder, Babur, had roots in the Timurid dynasty of Central Asia. Around the same time the Safavids were rising to power in Iran, Babur made his move, leading his forces out of Central Asia and into the Indian subcontinent, where he carved out an entirely new empire from scratch. His descendants would go on to rule vast stretches of the subcontinent for centuries. That dominance lasted until the British arrived, gradually tightened their grip, and, as the saying goes, squeezed the empire dry like a used tea bag until there was nothing left to take. Few countries have been shoved around by history quite like Poland. The Poland of centuries past looked nothing like the Poland of today. Its territory once extended much farther east, almost reaching Moscow at its peak, covering land that today belongs to Belarus and stretching up toward Estonia. But as Russia grew stronger and expanded westward over the centuries, Poland was squeezed in the same direction. The problem was, Poland had nowhere left to go. Its western neighbor was Germany, known at the time as Prussia. That pressure didn't just displace Poland, it pushed Germany too. Until the end of World War II, this territory belonged to Germany. Afterward, the Soviets took the remaining northern sliver of it and renamed it Kaliningrad, a piece of Russia that to this day sits disconnected from the rest of the country, wedged between Poland and Lithuania. So in the span of a few centuries, two major European powers, Poland and Germany, both had their territory fundamentally reshaped and shoved westward. Now let's go back to one of the most influential empires in human history. Rome began exactly where you'd expect, on the Italian peninsula. Over time, it expanded to dominate Western Europe and the entire Mediterranean coastline. But eventually, the empire cracked in two: the Western Roman Empire and the Eastern Roman Empire. The western half collapsed into what we now call the Dark Ages. But the eastern half, known to history as the Byzantine Empire, didn't just survive, it thrived for another 1,000 years. The catch was, its capital was no longer Rome. It was Constantinople, the city we call Istanbul today. Western Rome eventually fractured into the patchwork of nations we recognize now: the Holy Roman Empire, Switzerland, France, and others. Byzantium held on until 1453, when Sultan Mehmed the Conqueror took Constantinople and brought the empire and the very last living thread of ancient Rome to its final end. Some nations didn't relocate entirely. They just had a piece of themselves cut away. Usually that missing piece was their access to the sea. Take Serbia. It was once the heart of Yugoslavia, with its capital, Belgrade, sitting right at the center of the Federation. But after Yugoslavia's collapse and the brutal wars that followed, Serbia's connection to the Adriatic coast was severed. A country that once had direct maritime access became landlocked, forced to depend on its neighbors for any route to the sea. Then there's Bolivia, a country that lost far more than it bargained for. When Bolivia gained independence in 1825, it was a larger country with its own stretch of Pacific coastline. That access made Bolivia confident, maybe overconfident. Bolivia allied with Peru, and together they set their sights on a resource-rich strip of land belonging to Chile, planning to seize it and split it between themselves. They underestimated their opponent.
Chilean forces struck back hard, decisively defeating the Bolivian-Peruvian alliance in what became known as the War of the Pacific. Chile didn't stop at repelling the invasion, it seized Bolivia's entire coastline and never gave it back, framing the annexation as fair payment for the attack. Bolivia has been landlocked ever since, and its economy has suffered for it. To add insult to injury, Chile later forced Bolivia to sign a treaty that only grants it limited access to Chilean ports, a far cry from the coastline it once called its own. From Bulgars fleeing across the steppe to a British mapmaker renaming an entire nation, history makes one thing clear. Borders, and sometimes whole countries, are far less permanent than we like to assume. Stay curious. We'll see you in the next one.